The morning sun was shining bright over London as Alex stepped off the tour bus. He was a 28-year-old martial arts instructor from California, and he thought he was pretty hot stuff. With his third-degree black belt in Taekwondo hanging around his waist, Alex had won plenty of tournaments back home. Every trophy on his shelf told him he was special, and honestly, he started to believe it a little too much. Alex was in London for a big martial arts convention, but today he decided to play tourist. His first stop? Buckingham Palace. As he walked through the gates with dozens of other visitors, something caught his eye that made him smirk. There they were, the famous royal guards, standing perfectly still like statues. "Look at these guys," Alex muttered to himself, loud enough for others to hear. "They just stand there all day doing nothing. What's so special about that?" The guards were impressive, sure. Their red uniforms were spotless, their tall black hats perfectly straight, and they held their rifles with military precision. But to Alex, they looked like nothing more than fancy decoration. He'd spent years learning to kick, punch, and fight. These guys, they just stood around looking pretty for tourists. As Alex got closer to one of the guards, he couldn't help but notice how young the soldier looked. The guard's face was stone-cold serious, staring straight ahead like he was looking at something a million miles away. His breathing was so controlled you could barely see his chest move. Alex found this whole thing pretty funny. "I bet this guy has never been in a real fight in his life," Alex whispered to a fellow tourist standing nearby. The woman just smiled awkwardly and moved away. But Alex didn't care. He was on a roll now. He started walking in a small circle around the guard, studying him like he was some kind of museum piece. The soldier didn't even blink. His eyes stayed focused, straight ahead, completely ignoring Alex's obvious attempts to get his attention. "You know what I think?" Alex said, raising his voice so more tourists could hear. "I think these so-called guards are just for show. Back home, we have real fighters, people who actually know how to defend themselves." Small crowd was starting to gather now. Some tourists looked uncomfortable, but others seemed curious about what this loud American was going to do next. Alex loved having an audience. It reminded him of being back in his dojo, showing off his skills to impressed students. That's when Alex got an idea that he thought was absolutely brilliant. He took a few steps back from the guard and dropped into a fighting stance. His left foot forward, hands up in a defensive position, body turned at just the right angle. It was textbook Taekwondo form, and Alex knew he looked good doing it. "This is how a real fighter stands," he announced to anyone listening. Then he started throwing some practice punches in the air, his movements sharp and precise. Each punch cut through the air with a satisfying whoosh sound. The tourists were definitely watching now. Some were taking pictures, others were recording videos on their phones. Alex was eating it up. He moved into a series of kicks, starting with some basic front kicks, then moving to side kicks and finally showing off with some high kicks that brought his foot up to shoulder level. "See that technique?" Alex called out as he executed a perfect roundhouse kick. "That takes years of training to master. I bet none of these guards could do anything close to that." The royal guard continued to stand perfectly still. His face showed no emotion, no reaction to Alex's show. His grip on his rifle never wavered. His posture never changed. If anything, this made Alex even more determined to get some kind of response. Alex started moving closer to the guard again, this time throwing his practice punches and kicks just inches away from the soldier's face. Still nothing. The guard's eyes remained fixed straight ahead like Alex wasn't even there. "Unbelievable," Alex laughed, shaking his head. "This guy's like a robot. I could probably do my whole routine right here and he wouldn't even flinch." And that's exactly what Alex decided to do. He began performing his most impressive forms right there in front of the guard. His movements were smooth and powerful, each technique flowing into the next like a deadly dance. His black belt fluttered with each turn and kick, and Alex could hear the impressed murmurs from the growing crowd behind him. He threw combination punches, spinning back kicks, and even attempted a jump kick that had him airborne for almost a full second. When he landed, he immediately dropped into a low fighting stance and held it for dramatic effect. "Now that," Alex announced, standing up and brushing imaginary dust off his hands, "is what real combat training looks like. None of this standing around like a statue nonsense." The crowd seemed impressed, some even clapped. Alex soaked it all in, feeling like he was back in competition winning first place. But the guard? Still nothing. Still standing there like nothing had happened. This started to frustrate Alex more than he wanted to admit. Back home, when he showed off his skills, people were amazed. They asked questions, wanted to learn, showed respect for his abilities. But this guard was treating him like he was invisible. "You know what your problem is?" Alex said, stepping even closer to the guard now. He was close enough to see the detailed stitching on the soldier's uniform, close enough to notice the small beads of sweat on his forehead from standing in the London sun. "Your problem is that you've never faced a real martial artist. You've probably never even been in a real fight. All you know how to do is stand there and look tough for the cameras." The guard's breathing remained steady and controlled. His eyes never moved from whatever distant point he was focused on. But if Alex had been paying closer attention, he might have noticed something. The soldier's jaw was just a tiny bit tighter than before. His grip on the rifle had shifted almost imperceptibly. But Alex wasn't paying attention to small details. He was too busy enjoying his moment in the spotlight. The crowd had grown to about 20 people now, and everyone was watching to see what this crazy American would do next. "I'll tell you what," Alex said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "I bet I could take on any one of these guards in a fair fight. Any one of them. And I'm not talking about some fancy duel with swords or whatever they used to do in the old days. I'm talking about a real fight. Hand-to-hand combat. Martial arts versus, well, whatever it is they do here." Some tourists looked shocked at this bold statement. Others seemed excited by the possibility of seeing some kind of confrontation. Alex was feeding off their energy, feeling more confident by the minute. "In fact," Alex continued, now speaking, loud enough for all the nearby guards to hear, "I'm officially challenging any royal guard who thinks he's tough enough. Any one of you who wants to step away from your little post and show me what you've got." He gestured broadly at all the guards, within sight. There were 4 of them that Alex could see, all standing at different positions around the palace grounds. Each one maintained their perfect military posture, completely ignoring his challenge. "That's what I thought," Alex said with a satisfied nod. "All for show, no substance, just like I figured." But Alex was wrong about one thing. The guards weren't ignoring him as much as he thought. In fact, his loud voice and disrespectful behavior had definitely been noticed. Not just by the guards, but by the palace security personnel who were trained to watch for exactly this kind of situation. From a discreet distance, 2 plainclothes security officers were already making note of Alex's behavior. They'd seen tourists get excited before, but this level of disrespect toward the guards was something they took seriously. Alex, however, was completely unaware of any of this. He was too busy basking in what he thought was his moment of triumph. In his mind, he'd just proven his point perfectly. These famous royal guards were nothing more than fancy decorations, and he'd shown everyone watching that a real martial artist like himself was clearly superior. As the crowd started to disperse and move on to other attractions, Alex took one last look at the guard he'd been taunting. The soldier remained exactly as he had been for the past 15 minutes. Perfectly still, perfectly focused, perfectly professional. "Pathetic," Alex muttered under his breath as he finally walked away. But if Alex had bothered to learn anything about the guard he'd just spent 15 minutes insulting, he might have discovered something interesting. The young soldier's name was David, and he wasn't just some ceremonial decoration. He was actually a combat veteran of the British Army's elite parachute regiment, with 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan under his belt. David had been trained in close-quarters combat by some of the toughest instructors in the world. He'd learned hand-to-hand fighting techniques that were designed not for sport or competition, but for real-life survival situations where second place meant you didn't go home. But Alex didn't know any of that. All he knew was that he'd just shown a crowd of tourists how a real fighter operated, and none of these fake guards had dared to accept his challenge. As Alex walked away from Buckingham Palace, he was already planning how he'd tell this story back home. How he'd challenged the famous royal guards and they'd all been too scared to face him. How he'd proven that traditional martial arts training was superior to whatever these soldiers learned. He had no idea that his day was about to take a very different turn than he expected. Alex couldn't get the image out of his head. Those guards standing there like stone statues while he showed off his years of martial arts training. The more he thought about it, the more worked up he got. By the time he reached the palace gift shop, he was practically buzzing with energy. "Did you see that back there?" he said to another tourist browsing postcards. The middle-aged man looked up confused, clearly having no idea what Alex was talking about. "Those guards," Alex continued, "I just showed them what real fighting looks like, and they couldn't even be bothered to acknowledge it." The tourist just nodded politely and moved to a different section of the shop. But Alex wasn't done talking. His confidence was through the roof now, and he needed everyone to know about his little victory. As he wandered through the gift shop, Alex found himself telling anyone who would listen about his encounter with the royal guards. He described his martial arts demonstration in great detail, making it sound even more impressive than it had been. "You should have seen their faces," Alex said to a family looking at souvenir t-shirts. "Well, actually, their faces didn't change at all. That's how you know they were intimidated. They were trying so hard to look tough, but inside they knew they couldn't compete with real martial arts training." The family smiled awkwardly and moved away, but Alex didn't notice. He was too caught up in replaying the scene in his mind, each time making himself look a little more heroic. After spending almost an hour in the gift shop telling his story to anyone who would listen, Alex decided to head back outside. Maybe he could get some photos of himself doing martial arts poses in front of the palace. That would make for some great social media posts back home. But as he walked back toward the main courtyard, something unexpected happened. Alex saw one of the guards he'd been taunting earlier walking toward him. But this time, the guard wasn't in his ceremonial position. His shift had ended, and he was heading toward the staff exit. The guard had removed his tall black hat and loosened his red, ceremonial jacket, but he was still clearly recognizable. Alex felt a sudden rush of excitement. Finally, one of them was going to engage with him. "Hey there," Alex called out, jogging over to intercept the soldier. "You're one of the guards I was talking to earlier, right?" The guard stopped and turned to face Alex. Up close, Alex could see that the soldier was probably in his late 20s with short brown hair and serious brown eyes. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he was in excellent physical condition. But Alex was too excited to pay much attention to details like that. "I remember you," the guard said in a calm, professional voice with a slight British accent. "You were the gentleman performing martial arts demonstrations near my post." "That's right," Alex said, grinning widely. "Pretty impressive, wasn't it? I've been training for over 15 years. 3rd-degree black belt. I've won dozens of tournaments back in California." The guard nodded slowly. "I could see you had some training," he said diplomatically. "Some training?" Alex laughed. "Brother, I've dedicated my entire adult life to perfecting the art of combat. What I showed you today was just the basics. I've got techniques that would blow your mind." The guard, whose name was David, studied Alex carefully. During his time in the military, David had met plenty of people like Alex. Guys who were skilled in their sport or martial art, but who had never actually been in a real fight. David had learned to recognize the type. "I'm sure your training has been very comprehensive," David said politely. "Comprehensive? That's an understatement," Alex continued, warming to his favorite subject. "See, the thing is, what you guys do here is all for show, standing around looking pretty for the tourists. But what I do? That's real combat. That's actual fighting. Technique." David felt his jaw tighten slightly, but his expression remained neutral. He'd spent years learning to control his emotions, especially when dealing with disrespectful civilians. But something about Alex's attitude was starting to get under his skin. "I understand you have strong feelings about martial arts," David said carefully. "Strong feelings? This isn't about feelings. It's about facts," Alex replied, his voice getting a bit louder. "The fact is, traditional military training is outdated. You guys learn to march around and follow orders, but when it comes to actual hand-to-hand combat, you're completely out of your league." David took a deep breath. He'd been hoping this conversation would stay civil, but Alex seemed determined to make it confrontational. "With respect, sir, I think you might be making some assumptions about military training that aren't entirely accurate," David said, his voice still calm but with just a hint of steel underneath. "Assumptions?" Alex scoffed. "I saw you guys in action today. Or should I say I saw you guys standing perfectly still while I demonstrated real fighting techniques right in front of your faces. If that's not proof enough, I don't know what is." A few other tourists had started to notice the conversation and were slowing down to listen. Alex loved having an audience, and their attention only made him more confident. "Tell you what," Alex said, raising his voice so the gathering crowd could hear clearly. "Since you seem to think military training is so great, how about we settle this properly? You and me, a friendly sparring match. Give you a chance to show me what all that standing around has taught you." David felt his pulse quicken. He'd been in this exact situation before, though usually it was in bars near military bases rather than outside Buckingham Palace. Some civilian, with martial arts training, would get mouthy, challenge a soldier, and usually end up learning a hard lesson about the difference between sport fighting and military combat training. "Sir, I don't think that would be appropriate," David said, though part of him was very tempted. "Oh, come on," Alex pressed. "What's inappropriate about it? We're both adults. We both know how to fight. Let's see who's better at it." The crowd was definitely interested now. About 15 people had gathered around, sensing that something exciting might be about to happen. Alex fed off their energy, feeling like he was back in his dojo with all eyes on him. "I mean, unless you're scared," Alex added with a smirk. "I get it, I really do. You've never faced anyone with real training before. It's natural to be nervous." That did it. David had been trained to ignore insults and provocations, but there was something about Alex's smug attitude that pushed him past his limit. Maybe it was the long day standing in the sun. Maybe it was the way Alex had been disrespectful, not just to him but to all the guards. Or maybe it was just that David was tired of people assuming that military personnel were just for show. "You know what?" David said, his voice still controlled, but with a new edge to it. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we should settle this properly." Alex's eyes lit up. "Now we're talking. When and where?" David thought for a moment. He couldn't get into a fight on palace grounds, obviously. That would be a serious breach of regulations. But he was off duty now, and technically speaking, what he did on his own time was his own business. "There's a gym about 10 minutes from here," David said. "Dragon's Den. They stay open late, and they've got a proper mat area for sparring." "Perfect," Alex said, practically bouncing on his toes with excitement. "What time works for you?" "Give me 2 hours to get changed and grab some gear," David replied. "Meet me there at 8 o'clock. "You got it," Alex said, extending his hand for a shake. David shook it, noting that Alex's grip was strong but not particularly calloused. David's own hands were rough from years of military training and combat exercises. As they shook hands, David looked directly into Alex's eyes. "Just to be clear," he said quietly, "you're absolutely certain you want to do this?" "Are you kidding me?" Alex laughed. "I've been waiting for this opportunity all day. Finally, a chance to show one of you guys what real fighting looks like." David nodded slowly. "All right then, Dragon's Den Gym, 8 o'clock. As David walked away, Alex turned to the crowd that had witnessed the exchange. He was practically glowing with excitement and confidence. "Did you hear that?" he announced to anyone listening. "We're actually going to do this. Royal Guard versus real martial artist. This is going to be epic." Several people in the crowd seemed genuinely excited about the prospect. A few asked Alex if they could come watch, and he enthusiastically told them they were welcome to attend. "Trust me, you don't want to miss this," Alex said. "I'm about to give everyone a lesson in what happens when ceremonial soldiers try to fight real martial artists." As the crowd dispersed, Alex pulled out his phone and started looking up directions to Dragon's Den Gym. He also started composing a social media post about his upcoming match. "About to teach a royal guard the difference between real fighting and standing around looking pretty," he typed. "This is going to be legendary." What Alex didn't know was that David was also making preparations for their meeting. But David's preparations were a bit different from what Alex might have expected. David's first stop was his flat, where he changed out of his ceremonial uniform and into workout clothes. As he changed, he thought about Alex's cocky attitude and disrespectful behavior. David had dealt with plenty of overconfident civilians before, but something about Alex had really gotten under his skin. Maybe it was because David took real pride in his service and his training. Alex spent the next 2 hours in a state of pure excitement. He'd never felt more confident in his entire life. Finally, after years of training and competing, he was going to get the chance to prove that his martial arts skills were superior to military training, and he was going to do it in front of witnesses. His first stop was his hotel room, where he carefully laid out his competition gear, his pristine white GI, freshly pressed and spotless, his third-degree black belt, the one he'd earned after years of dedication and hard work, his protective gear, including his favorite sparring gloves and shin guards. As he got dressed, Alex caught sight of himself in the hotel room mirror. He looked every bit the part of a serious martial artist. The GI fit him perfectly, showing off his athletic build. The black belt around his waist was a symbol of everything he'd accomplished in the world of competitive taekwondo. "This is it," Alex said to his reflection. "This is your moment to show the world what you're really made of." Alex spent almost 30 minutes going through his warm-up routine in the hotel room. He stretched every muscle group, practiced his favorite combinations, and ran through some of his most impressive techniques. By the time he was finished, he felt loose, focused, and ready for anything. But Alex wasn't just preparing physically. He was also preparing mentally for what he expected to be an easy victory. In his mind, he pictured how the fight would go. The Royal Guard would probably try some basic military hand-to-hand combat moves, maybe some wrestling or simple strikes. Alex would easily counter everything with his superior technique and speed. He imagined landing a perfect high kick, or executing a flawless combination that would leave his opponent stunned. He pictured the crowd of witnesses being amazed by his skill and precision. Most of all, he imagined the look on the guard's face when he realized he was completely outmatched. Poor guy probably has no idea what he's gotten himself into, Alex chuckled to himself as he headed out of the hotel. The walk to Dragon's Den gym took about 15 minutes, and Alex used the time to get himself even more pumped up. He listened to his favorite training music through his earbuds, the same aggressive songs he always used to get ready for tournaments. By the time he arrived at the gym, Alex was practically bouncing with energy. Dragon's Den was exactly the kind of place he'd expected. A no-frills training facility with heavy bags, weight equipment, and most importantly, a large mat area perfect for sparring. Alex arrived about 10 minutes early, which gave him time to check out the space and do some final preparation. The gym owner, a friendly older man named Pete, welcomed him and showed him around. "So you're the American martial artist I heard about," Pete said with a grin. "Word travels fast in this neighborhood. Heard you challenged one of the palace guards to a friendly match." "That's right," Alex said proudly. "Should be pretty interesting. I don't think he knows what he's gotten himself into." Pete raised an eyebrow. "Which guard are you fighting, if you don't mind me asking?" "I don't actually know his name," Alex admitted. "Young guy, brown hair, seemed pretty serious." "Why, do you know him?" Pete's expression changed slightly. "Brown hair, serious looking, about your age? That sounds like it might be David. He comes in here sometimes to train." "Oh, really?" Alex said, suddenly very interested. "What's he like? Pretty basic military training, I'm guessing." Pete was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. Well, he's a good lad. Very professional, always respectful to everyone here." Alex nodded, but he wasn't really paying attention. He was too busy visualizing his upcoming victory. "Well, he seems nice enough. Hopefully he won't take it too personally when I show him the difference between real martial arts and whatever they teach in the military." Pete just nodded, but there was something in his expression that Alex didn't quite catch. If Alex had been paying closer attention, he might have noticed that Pete looked a bit concerned. As 8 o'clock approached, more people started showing up at the gym. Word had definitely gotten around about the impromptu match between the American martial artist and the Royal Guard. Alex counted at least a dozen spectators, maybe more. "This is perfect," Alex thought to himself. "The more people who see this, the better." Alex used the extra time to continue his warm-up routine on the mats. He went through his forms with precision and power, each technique crisp and controlled. The growing crowd watched with obvious appreciation, and Alex could hear murmurs of approval. "He's really good," he heard someone whisper. "Look at that technique," someone else said. Alex was eating it up. This was exactly the kind of attention and respect he was used to receiving back home. It felt good to know that even here in London, people could recognize real skill when they saw it. At exactly 8 o'clock, the gym door opened and David walked in. But this version of David was very different from the ceremonial guard Alex had met earlier. Gone was the red uniform and formal military bearing. Instead, David wore simple black workout shorts and a plain gray t-shirt. His hair was still neatly cut in military fashion, but without the formal uniform, he looked more like a regular guy coming in for a workout. What struck Alex immediately was how calm David seemed. While Alex was buzzing with nervous energy and excitement, David looked completely relaxed. He walked into the gym like he owned the place, nodding casually to Pete and a few other people he obviously knew. "Evening, Pete," David said in his quiet, controlled voice. "Thanks for letting us use the space." "No problem at all, David," Pete replied. "You know you're always welcome here." David turned to Alex and extended his hand for a shake. "Ready to do this?" Alex shook his hand enthusiastically. "Been ready all day, brother. This is going to be fun." David smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile Alex was expecting. It wasn't nervous or uncertain. It was the kind of calm, confident smile that suggested David was looking forward to this just as much as Alex was, but for very different reasons. "Before we start," David said, "I want to make sure we're on the same page about rules. This is just a friendly sparring match, right? No one's trying to seriously hurt anyone." "Absolutely," Alex agreed quickly. "Just a chance for both of us to show what we've learned. May the best fighter win." "Fair enough," David nodded. "Light contact, stop when someone taps out or says stop, and we shake hands afterward regardless of what happens." "Deal," Alex said, though privately he was already planning his victory celebration. As the two men prepared for their match, the crowd gathered around the mat area. Alex noticed there were even more people now than when he'd arrived. Word was definitely spreading about this unusual matchup. Pete stepped forward to act as an informal referee. "All right, gentlemen, you both know the rules. Keep it clean. Keep respectful. And remember, this is just for fun." Alex bounced on his toes, loosening up his legs and shoulders. He ran through his game plan one more time in his head. Start with some probing kicks to test David's defense, then move in with hand combinations when he found an opening. David would probably try to close distance and wrestle, which was exactly what Alex was prepared for. David, meanwhile, stood quietly in his corner of the mat, doing some simple stretches. He wasn't bouncing around or showing off like Alex. He just looked ready, like this was something he did every day. "You sure you don't want any protective gear?" Alex called over to David. "I've got extra gloves and shin guards if you need them." David shook his head. "Thanks, but I'm fine." Alex shrugged. If David wanted to spar without protection, that was his choice. Alex was wearing his favorite sparring gloves and shin guards, the same gear he used in tournaments. "Whenever you gentlemen are ready," Pete announced. Alex stepped to the center of the mat, dropping into his favorite fighting stance. Left foot forward, hands up in a perfect guard position, weight balanced, and ready to explode into action. It was a stance that had served him well in dozens of competitions. David stepped forward as well, but his stance was different. Less formal, more natural looking. His hands were up but relaxed, his feet in a comfortable position that didn't obviously favor any particular fighting style. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something special was about to happen. Alex could feel their eyes on him, could sense their anticipation. This was his moment to shine. "Ready?" Pete asked. Both men nodded. "All right then," Pete said, raising his hand. "Let's see what you've both got. Begin." Alex immediately started, bouncing lightly on his toes the way he always did at the start of a match. He began circling David, looking for the perfect angle to launch his first attack. His mind was racing with possibilities, calculating distances and timing. David, on the other hand, simply stood in place, turning slightly to keep Alex in front of him. He looked completely relaxed, like he was having a casual conversation rather than starting a fight. The contrast between the two fighters was striking. Alex looked like a coiled spring, ready to explode into action at any moment. David looked like he had all the time in the world. Alex threw a few probing jabs, not really trying to land them, just testing David's reactions. David easily avoided them by moving his head slightly, but he didn't counterattack. He just kept watching Alex with those calm, serious eyes. "Come on," Alex thought to himself. "Show me what you've got." Alex bounced on his toes one more time, feeling the rhythm of the fight building inside him. He'd shown David some of his skills, but now it was time for the real show. This was the moment he'd been training for his entire martial arts career. "Here we go," Alex muttered under his breath, dropping into his most aggressive fighting stance. The crowd sensed that something big was about to happen. The casual probing and testing phase was over. Alex's body language had changed completely. He looked like a predator ready to strike. Alex exploded forward with his signature combination, a lightning-fast jab to set up the distance, followed immediately by a powerful high kick aimed directly at David's head. It was a move that had knocked out 3 different opponents in tournament competition. The technique was flawless. Alex's form was perfect, his speed was impressive, and his power was undeniable. Anyone watching could see that this was a serious martial artist executing a serious attack. But something unexpected happened. As Alex's kick reached its target, David wasn't there anymore. The guard had moved so subtly and smoothly that most people in the crowd didn't even see how he'd done it. One moment he was standing directly in front of Alex, and the next moment he was slightly to the side. Alex's kick sailed harmlessly through empty air, leaving him slightly off balance from the force of his own attack. Before Alex could recover his stance, David moved again. But this time, instead of avoiding Alex's attack, David was launching his own. David's movement was nothing like what Alex had expected. There were no flashy kicks, no complicated combinations, no dramatic fighting stances. David simply stepped forward and threw what looked like a basic straight punch. But there was something different about this punch. It wasn't the kind of punch you'd throw in a boxing match or a martial arts tournament. It was simple, direct, and devastatingly effective. The punch caught Alex completely off guard. He'd been expecting some kind of military wrestling move or maybe a basic kick. He wasn't prepared for the speed and precision of David's attack. Alex tried to block, throwing up his guard the way he'd been trained, but David's punch seemed to slip right through his defense, finding a gap that Alex didn't even know existed. The punch didn't land with full force. David was obviously controlling his power to avoid seriously injuring Alex, but it landed clean on Alex's shoulder, spinning him around and knocking him off balance. Alex stumbled sideways, trying to regain his footing and his composure. His mind was racing. What had just happened? How had David moved so fast? How had his punch gotten through Alex's defense so easily? "Good technique," David said calmly, as if they were discussing the weather. "Your kick had excellent form." Alex barely heard the compliment. He was too busy trying to figure out what had gone wrong. This wasn't how the fight was supposed to go. Alex was supposed to be dominating with his superior martial arts skills. "Let's try that again," Alex said, more to himself than to David. Alex reset his stance and launched another attack. This time he went with a different approach, a series of rapid punches designed to overwhelm David's defenses through sheer volume and speed. Alex's hands moved in a blur, throwing combination after combination. Left jab, right cross, left hook, right uppercut. His technique was textbook perfect, each punch thrown with proper form and maximum speed. But David seemed to slip away from every single attack. He moved his head just enough to avoid each punch, never wasting energy on big dramatic movements. It was like trying to hit smoke. And then, while Alex was in the middle of his most complex combination, David countered again. This time it wasn't a punch. David grabbed Alex's leading arm during one of his attacks and used Alex's own forward momentum against him. With a simple twist and pull, David sent Alex stumbling past him, completely off balance and exposed. As Alex struggled to regain his footing, David could have followed up with any number of devastating techniques. Instead, he simply let Alex recover and stepped back to a neutral distance. "You're very fast," David observed, still sounding completely calm and unworried. Alex was starting to breathe heavily now. He'd thrown dozens of techniques in the past minute, and none of them had even come close to landing. Meanwhile, David looked like he'd barely broken a sweat. The crowd was murmuring now, and Alex could hear the confusion in their voices. This wasn't what anyone had expected to see. Alex was supposed to be the skilled martial artist, but David was making him look clumsy and predictable. "What's wrong with me?" Alex thought frantically. "Why can't I hit him?" Alex decided to go back to what he knew best. He threw a perfect roundhouse kick, the same technique that had won him his black belt. His leg whipped through the air with tremendous speed and power. David caught the kick. It happened so fast that Alex didn't even realize what had occurred until he found himself hopping on one foot, his other leg trapped in David's grip. "Nice flexibility," David commented, holding Alex's leg casually like it weighed nothing. Before Alex could react, David swept Alex's standing leg out from under him. Alex crashed to the mat hard, landing flat on his back with a thud that echoed through the gym. The crowd gasped. In less than 10 seconds, David had gone from calmly standing there to putting Alex on the ground. Alex rolled away quickly and scrambled back to his feet. His back was sore from the fall and his pride was hurt even more. But he wasn't ready to give up yet. There had to be an explanation for what was happening. "Lucky grab," Alex muttered, though he wasn't sure if he really believed. "Are you all right?" David asked, genuine concern in his voice. "We can stop if you'd like." "Stop?" Alex said, incredulous. "We're just getting started." But even as Alex said the words, he was starting to realize that something was very wrong. This wasn't going anything like he'd expected. David wasn't fighting. Like any opponent Alex had ever faced in tournament competition, David's techniques weren't flashy or complicated. They were simple, direct, and brutally effective. Every movement had a purpose, and nothing was wasted on show or style. Alex tried a different approach. Maybe he was being too aggressive. Maybe he needed to be more patient, more strategic. He started circling David again, looking for the perfect opening. But as soon as Alex started moving, David moved too. And somehow, David always seemed to be in exactly the right position. No matter how Alex tried to angle for an attack, David was already there waiting for him. Alex threw a feint, trying to trick David into reacting to a fake attack so he could counter with a real one. David didn't react at all. He just kept watching, Alex with those calm, calculating eyes. Getting frustrated, Alex abandoned strategy and went for power. He launched his most devastating kick, a spinning heel kick that had the power to knock out a heavyweight opponent. David stepped inside the kick, too close for it to generate power, and trapped Alex in a clinch before the technique could fully develop. Suddenly, Alex found himself pressed against David's body, unable to use any of his kicking techniques. This was David's range now, and Alex had no idea how to fight in such close quarters. David demonstrated a simple but effective throw, using Alex's own momentum to send him flying across the mat. Alex landed hard again, this time on his side. Alex struggled to get up. He could hear the crowd's reaction changing. The initial excitement had given way to something that sounded almost like sympathy. People were starting to realize that this wasn't the competitive match they'd expected to see. Alex got back to his feet, but he was breathing heavily now. His GI was wrinkled and dirty from hitting the mat twice. Sweat was dripping down his face, and his confidence was completely shattered. "This isn't possible," Alex thought desperately. "I'm a third-degree black belt. I've won dozens of tournaments. How is this guy making me look like a beginner?" David, meanwhile, still looked completely fresh. His breathing was steady, his movements were relaxed, and he showed no signs of fatigue whatsoever. "Would you like to continue?" David asked politely. Alex nodded, though he wasn't sure why. Every instinct in his body was telling him to quit, to admit defeat and walk away, but his pride wouldn't let him give up. Alex tried one more time, throwing everything he had into a final desperate combination. Punches, kicks, knees, elbows. He used every technique in his arsenal, attacking with all the speed and power he could muster. For a few seconds, Alex thought he might actually be getting somewhere. His attacks were coming so fast that even David seemed to be working harder to avoid them. But then David shifted tactics. Instead of just avoiding Alex's attacks, he started countering them. David grabbed one of Alex's punches and used it to spin Alex around. Before Alex could recover, David had him in a control hold that left Alex completely helpless. Alex tried to break free, using all his strength and technique. But David's position was perfect. No matter what Alex did, he couldn't escape. "That's enough," David said quietly. But his voice carried clearly through the gym. Alex was forced to tap out. It was the most humiliating moment of his entire martial arts career. David immediately released the hold and helped Alex to his feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked with genuine concern. Alex shook his head, though his body was sore and his ego was completely destroyed. The entire fight had lasted less than 2 minutes, and Alex had been completely dominated from start to finish. Alex stood on the mat, breathing heavily and trying to make sense of what had just happened to him. His pristine white GI was now wrinkled and stained with sweat. His third-degree black belt, which had always been a source of pride and confidence, now felt like it was mocking him. The silence in the gym was deafening. 20 or so people had gathered to watch what they expected to be an exciting match between a skilled martial artist and a royal guard. Instead, they'd witnessed something closer to a teaching demonstration, with Alex playing the role of the student who didn't know he was in class. David stood a few feet away, looking completely unchanged from when the match had started. His breathing was normal, his clothes were barely wrinkled, and he showed no signs that he'd just been in a physical confrontation. "I don't understand," Alex said finally, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I've been training for 15 years. I've won tournaments. I've fought some of the best martial artists in California. How did you make that look so easy?" David studied Alex's face for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. When he spoke, his voice was patient and respectful, without any trace of mockery or superiority. "You're clearly a skilled martial artist," David began. "Your technique is excellent, your conditioning is good, and you obviously know your art." "Very well." Alex waited for the "but" that he knew was coming. "But," David continued, "there's a difference between sport fighting and the kind of training I received in the military. What you've learned is designed for competition, with rules and referees and weight classes. What I learned was designed for survival." Alex nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure he fully understood yet. "What do you mean?" David gestured toward a corner of the gym where they could talk more privately. The crowd was starting to disperse now that the match was clearly over, but a few people lingered, obviously curious about what the two fighters might say to each other. "In martial arts tournaments," David explained, "you're fighting people who are roughly your size and skill level. There are rules about what techniques you can use, what targets you can hit, and how much contact is allowed. The goal is to score points or demonstrate superior technique." Alex nodded. This all sounded familiar. "In the military," David continued, "we train for situations where there are no rules, where your opponent might be bigger, stronger, armed, or working with partners, where the goal isn't to score points but to survive and complete your mission." David paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Your martial arts training has given you excellent physical conditioning and technical skills, but it's also taught you to fight in a very specific way, against very specific opponents under very specific conditions." Alex was starting to understand, though it was painful to accept. "So you're saying my training is useless?" "Not at all," David said quickly. "Your training is excellent for what it was designed for. If you and I were in a tournament setting, with rules and a referee, you'd probably do much better. Your kicks are faster than mine, your combinations are more complex, and you have better flexibility." Alex felt slightly better hearing this, but he could tell David wasn't finished. "The problem is that real fighting doesn't happen in tournaments," David continued. "In real situations, fights are unpredictable. They don't start when someone says begin, and they don't stop when someone scores a point. The techniques that work best are usually simple, direct, and designed to end the fight as quickly as possible." As David spoke, Alex began to replay the match in his mind. He realized that everything David was saying was true. Alex had been fighting like he was in a tournament, trying to demonstrate superior technique, looking for point-scoring opportunities, following the unwritten rules of competitive martial arts. David, on the other hand, had been fighting to win. Every move had been designed to neutralize Alex's attacks and create opportunities for decisive action. There had been no wasted motion, no flashy techniques, and no concern for looking impressive. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Alex asked. David was quiet for a moment, and Alex could see something change in his expression. When David spoke again, his voice was more serious. "I'm a paratrooper," David said. "I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the parachute regiment. The hand-to-hand combat training we receive isn't about art or sport. It's about staying alive when everything goes wrong." Alex felt his stomach drop. He'd been taunting and challenging a combat veteran, someone who had learned to fight not in gyms and tournaments, but in real-world situations where losing meant dying. "I had no idea," Alex said quietly. "When I saw you standing guard at the palace, I just assumed. You assumed I was just for show?" David finished with a slight smile that wasn't entirely friendly, that I was just some ceremonial soldier who didn't know how to really fight. Alex nodded, feeling more embarrassed by the minute. "I'm sorry. I was completely out of line." David's expression softened slightly. "You weren't the first person to make that assumption, and you won't be the last. People see the red uniform and the tall hat and they think we're just tourist attractions." David paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a note of pride that Alex was just beginning to understand. "But the truth is, most Royal Guards are serving soldiers from elite units. We're selected for these positions because of our military records, not despite them. The Guard isn't a break from real military service. It's a recognition of exemplary service." Alex felt smaller with every word David spoke. Not only had he challenged someone far more skilled than himself, but he'd done it while showing complete disrespect for that person's service and sacrifice. "I feel like a complete idiot," Alex admitted. "Don't," David said, his voice becoming more compassionate. "You couldn't have known my background, and honestly, your confidence isn't entirely misplaced. You are a skilled fighter within your specialty." David gestured toward the mat where they'd just sparred. "The problem is that you let that skill make you overconfident about fighting in general. You assumed that because you were good at one type of fighting, you'd be good at all types of fighting." Alex nodded, finally beginning to understand the lesson David was trying to teach him. "It's like..." David paused, searching for the right analogy. "It's like being an excellent Formula One driver and assuming that means you'd be equally good at driving a tank through a battlefield. The basic skills translate, but the context is completely different." Alex laughed despite himself. It was a perfect comparison, and it highlighted just how naive his assumptions had been. "So what should I do with this information?" Alex asked. "I mean, I still love martial arts. I'm still going to keep training, but I feel like I've been living in a bubble." David nodded approvingly. "The fact that you're asking that question tells me you learned the right lesson from this experience." David thought for a moment before continuing. "Keep training in your martial arts. Keep competing in tournaments. Those skills are valuable, and you've worked hard to develop them. But remember that they're tools designed for specific situations. And maybe," David added with a slight grin, "be a little more respectful when you encounter people whose training you don't understand. You never know what someone's background might be." Alex nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. I can't believe how arrogant I was today. We all make mistakes," David said diplomatically. "The important thing is learning from them." As the two men talked, Alex found himself genuinely liking David. Despite having just humiliated him in front of a crowd, David was being patient, respectful, and educational. Alex was beginning to understand that this kind of quiet confidence and professionalism was probably typical of elite military personnel. "Can I ask you something?" Alex said. "When you were standing guard today and I was showing off in front of you, what were you thinking?" David chuckled. "Honestly, I was trying very hard not to react. We're trained to ignore distractions and provocations while we're on duty. but part of me was definitely wondering if you'd ever been in a real fight. And now you know the answer, Alex said ruefully. Now I know the answer, David agreed. But Alex, don't let this experience discourage you from martial arts. What you've learned has value. Just remember to keep it in perspective. Alex nodded, feeling like he was finally beginning to process everything that had happened. The physical defeat had been embarrassing, but the lessons he was learning from David were valuable. I have one more question, Alex said. The people who saw this tonight, some of them were recording it on their phones. Is this going to end up all over social media? David shrugged. Probably. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Alex looked at him in surprise. How is it not a bad thing? I just got completely dominated in front of a bunch of strangers. Because, David explained, maybe other people will see it and learn the same lesson you're learning right now. Maybe someone else who's thinking about challenging a stranger to a fight will reconsider. Maybe someone else will think twice before making assumptions about people based on their appearance. Alex hadn't thought about it that way, but David was right. If his humiliation could prevent someone else from making the same mistakes, maybe there was some value in it. As the two men shook hands and prepared to part ways, Alex felt like a